Hello, I'm Bryan Atkinson and welcome once again to UK Aircraft Explored. Following on from my last video covering the Lancaster B.Mk.II, I thought I would carry on with the Lancaster theme and take a look at the Avro Lancastrian, a somewhat lesser known version of the Lancaster bomber that was developed into a small airliner and transport. As always, I shall be referring to Air Ministry manuals. I hope you find this interesting. The Avro 691 Lancastrian was a British and Canadian built passenger and mail transport aircraft used in the 1940s and 50s, being developed from the Avro Lancaster bomber. Its development required all gun turrets to be removed and the fitment of a streamlined nose and tail section. The Avro Lancastrian story is thought to have begun when a Lancaster B.Mk.I R5727 was flown from the UK to a Victory aircraft at Moulton, Ontario in Canada in August of 1942. It was originally sent as a pattern aircraft for the tooling and development of the Lancaster B.Mk.X variant. After that work was carried out, Victory aircraft decided to fare over the nose and tail gun turrets and remove the mid-upper turret. The original nose cone housed the navigator under a glazed top. 3 new windows were also fitted towards the back of the aircraft, and all camouflage paint was removed. The new aircraft then joined Trans-Canada Airlines, where experimental freight carrying flights between Moncton and Goose Bay were carried out, carrying a payload of up to £14,000. It was then decided that the modifications had actually created a potentially useful transport aircraft. It was then decided to fly the aircraft back to England to A V Roes. In order to do this, extra fuel tanks were mounted in the bomb bay, increasing the range to 4,000 miles. And seats were fitted for 10 passengers. Recamouflaged and registered CFCMS, as it was operated by the Canadian government's Transatlantic Air Service. The aircraft took off on the 22nd of July 1943, carrying 4 tons of mail from Dorval in Quebec, Canada, flying to Prestwick in Scotland. It flew non-stop in just under 12.5 hours. Once in the UK, a British certificate of airworthiness was granted for passenger carrying on the 1st of September 1943. Following this, 2 additional Canadian-built Lancaster Mk.X were converted by Trans-Canada Airlines at Montreal and re-registered. The type was designated XPP, standing for the Mk.X passenger plane. A total of 8 Lancaster Mk.X aircraft were converted by Victory Aircraft in Canada. Following the success of these Canadian conversions, Avro in the UK decided to develop a new version with 500-gallon fuel tanks fitted in the forward bomb bay. The new type was put into production at Manchester during 1944 as the Avro 691, built to the specification C16 1944. Designated the Lancastrian C1, GAGLF was delivered to Herne in Dorset for the BOAC, that's the British Overseas Airways Corporation, development flight, and received its certificate of airworthiness on the 7th of February 1945. In April of that year, this aircraft made a record-breaking flight to New Zealand in 3.5 days. Before this, a flight of this length would have taken around 4 times as long. 20 Lancastrians from the end of the Lancaster production were delivered to BOAC by October of 1945. They are operated jointly with Qantas on the Kangaroo Service in RAF Transport Command markings. with Australian crews taking over each flight at Karachi. The first scheduled flight left Herne on the 31st of May 1945, while the westbound machine left Sydney on the 2nd of June. Despite incurring a heavy financial loss, it was decided to continue the Kangaroo Service for prestige purposes, although each Lancastrian carried only 9 passengers and a small amount of mail. With the advent of the Lancastrian, Britain now had a commercial aircraft with sufficient range to make the South Atlantic crossing. Senior BOAC captain Opie Jones left Herne in GAGMG Nicosia and successfully surveyed the route to Buenos Aires and over the Andes to Santiago and Lima. It was then decided to form the British South American Airways Corporation, using 6 Lancastrian C3 aircraft, each carrying up to 13 passengers. The new regular service started in 1946. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force, with overseas commitments in India, Australia and the Far East, had ordered 33 Lancastrian C2s as an interim long-range transport aircraft. These Lancastrians were fitted with Merlin T24 engines and only 9 seats. Built at Woodford, they were delivered between October 1945 and March of 1946. They entered service at RAF Falls Sutton with the Lancastrian Training Unit. Civilian pilots also received familiarisation with this unit, which eventually became No. 231 Squadron of Transport Command. No. 232 Squadron, based at Palan in India, and No. 511 Squadron at Lynham also used the Lancastrian. The Empire Central Flying School received 2 aircraft, VM-728 and VM-729. Also, VL-968 joined the Empire Air Navigation School at Shawbury in Shropshire, which at the time was using Lancaster PD-328, that's Aries I, fitted with the Lancastrian type nose and tail cone. Aries I began its flying career in 1944 by circumnavigating the Earth in 40 days, covering a total distance of over 47,000 miles. In total, Aries I flew almost 200,000 miles. It made liaison trips to Canada and the United States in 1945, and just 2 days after VE Day, made the spectacular flight over the North Geographic and Magnetic Poles. When it returned after 2 weeks, it had flown a total of 28,700 miles, of which nearly 20,000 had been over the Arctic regions. In 1946, the last year of its career, Aries I established official records on the route from London to Karachi, London to Darwin, and London to Wellington. It also flew non-stop from Cairo to the Cape. In the autumn of that year, a liaison flight to Canada and the USA was made before Aries I was finally scrapped in January of 1947. Eight Lancastrian C.Mk.IVs were built at Yeadon and delivered in March of 1946, these being equivalent to civilian 10 to 13 seat C3s. 3 of these being overhauled for FEMA in Argentina, all being transferred to the Argentinian Air Force in 1949 as VIP transports. In total, 80 Avro Lancastrians were produced. Of the last 18 ordered as Lancastrian C3s by the British South American Airways Corporation, only 6 were delivered, due to the airline being absorbed by BOAC. Of the remaining 12, 5 were collected by the newly formed British European Airways Corporation for the Italian AAII, a partly British-owned company. Here is IDALR, named Berea. They were used for a weekly Rome-Buenos Aires service, which commenced on June 2, 1948, with stops at Dakar, Natal, Rio de Janeiro and Montevideo. Total flying time for this journey was 30 hours, with altogether 5.5 hours on the ground at the 4 stops mentioned. 3 Lancastrians formed the initial equipment for Silver City Airways, and 4 sold to Skyways, who used them for charter flights to South Africa, Australia and the Far East. Skyways also bought 8 ex-RAF Lancastrian C2s and 4s during 1947 and 48, and 5 were sold to BOAC for use on their South American service after the failure of the Avro Tudor. Qantas took over 3 of BOAC's original Lancastrians, named Nairn, Nicobar and Nottingham, along with Silver City's City of London. From December 16, 1947, they started a weekly flight for the Royal Australian Air Force from Sydney to Japan. A ventral pannier to carry spare Merlin power plants was also fitted to one of these Lancastrians, and a service extended to Tokyo in October of 1948. The Berlin Airlift of 1948 to 49 extended the Lancastrian's life, with Flight Refuelling Ltd adapting 14 aircraft for the bulk work of delivering petrol and oil with 2,500-gallon fuselage tanks. A total of 5,600 sorties were made by the combined fleet, 5 from BOAC, 4 from Trans-Canadian Airlines and 5 from Skyways. The 4 Skyway Lancastrians also carried churns from Belfast to Liverpool during the 1947 milk shortage. After the Berlin Airlift, the Lancastrians were flown back to their bases at Herne, Dunsfold and Tarrant Rushton, and were scrapped in 1951. The Avro Lancastrian arrived at the Rolls-Royce flight test establishment during 1945, and 2 of them were to play a major part in the Nene gas turbine development programme. The Lancastrian was the perfect vehicle for this type of work. Being a 4-engined aircraft, it offered 2 positions for conversion to take the jets. This enabled each flight to produce twice as much development flying time. The outboard positions were chosen so that the jet wash would not affect the tail fins. The retention of proven Merlin engines in the inboard positions meant that, in the event of jet engine failure, the aircraft could return to base safely. Being a passenger-carrying aircraft, the Lancastrian also offered comfortable accommodation for a greater number of flight test engineers and their equipment. PD-167 was the first to arrive in August of 1945. The following month, its serial was changed to VH737. In April of 1946, after a period of storage, work commenced on converting its outboard engine positions to take the Nene jet engine. In April of 1947, VH737 was dispatched to RAE Farnborough, and on its return 4 months later was fitted with a water spray grid on the port outer installation to simulate icing conditions. Perhaps the most famous of all Lancastrian flying test beds was VH742, which was delivered to Hucknall in October of 1945. On arrival, it underwent conversion to Nenes and took to the air for the first time on August 14th of 1946. By September, it had flown a total of 28 hours, and on the 10th had flown to Radlett for exhibition at the SBAC show. In a sense, this was the world's first jet-powered airliner, inasmuch as prior to its arrival, the only people who had flown in a jet aircraft were test pilots and their engineers. Now, with its inward-facing row of seats, VH742 played host to various dignitaries, and in particular to the aviation press, who went into raptures at the experience. September the 19th, 1946, was a busy day for the Rolls-Royce Public Relations Department, when VH742 made 3 flights carrying correspondence from flight, aeroplane and aeronautics, along with such dailies as the Express, Graphic and Herald, along with representatives from A V Roes and the Ministry of Supply. The following week, Flight magazine reported, "Flying in the Lancastrian, using only its 2 knees, is a memorable experience, and one immediately feels like repeating to everyone, you must try it. It's not just a case of being noiseless, but even more important, it is vibrationless. The appeal of gliding with its silent, graceful motion and the gentle swish of the air is immediately understandable." A total of 639 hours were flown by VH742, with knees installed. The final flight being on August 4th, 1949. After a period at workshops being converted to take the TAE engines, which were later cancelled, VH742 was put into storage for a year, then dismantled and transported to the Proof and Experimental Establishment at Shoebury-Ness. The Lancastrian was well suited to test many new engines at the time, and here is a list of the individual aircraft used, the test engine fitted, and where known the first flight. We shall now look at the main differences between the Lancaster bomber and the Lancastrian. Modifications to produce the Lancastrian were quite simple, and mainly involved the extension of the fuselage to 76 feet 10 inches. The original bomber nose was replaced, forward of former E, by a new streamlined nose, approximately 12 feet long, terminating in an upward hinged cargo door, secured at the bottom by 2 bolts. This new section could carry up to 2,275 pounds and had 4 lashing points to secure the load. The pilot's cabin was dimensionally identical with the Lancaster. First and second pilots were accommodated, the latter having a collapsible seat so that access could be made forward. Whilst the Lancaster was fitted with a single control yoke, the Lancastrian was fitted with dual flying control yokes, as shown here. The flight engineer's seat was behind the first pilot, facing his panel on the starboard cockpit wall. The navigator was provided with a table similar to the Lancaster, but slightly shorter, again on the left-hand side of the fuselage, his seat being on the right, and the wireless operator sat immediately in front of the main spar, facing forwards. The Lancaster bomber's instrument panel was fitted with a bomb container's jettison button and a bomb jettison control, as shown here. The Lancastrian instrument panel has these 2 controls removed, and a blanking panel is fitted. Some later instrument panels were also fitted with dual blind flying panels. The flight engineer's panel, located on the starboard side of the cockpit, is identical in both cases, but the Lancastrian's panel has an additional smaller upper panel providing fuel flow meter gauges, switches and warning lamps. It also includes wing and propeller de-icing controls. Between the forward and rear wing spars, the forward toilet compartment was fitted, whilst the galley was behind the rear spar and included a refrigerator, electric hot water urn, drinking water filter and a steward's seat. Access to the passenger cabin was through a door on the starboard side on the bulkhead at former 17. The passenger compartment, panelled like the galley in plywood and soundproofed with glass wall, was 20 feet long and 4 foot 6 inches wide, and offered just over 6 feet in height above the floor on the centre line. In earlier versions, 9 passengers sat facing to the right and to the windows. Later versions, with windows on both sides but no galley, had up to 14 seats arranged in a conventional manner. Immediately opposite the entrance door was a small cloakroom, which also housed an H or J type dinghy in a BOAC valise. After the entrance door is the rear toilet compartment, between the cloakroom and tailplane. At the rear, the luggage compartment is 6 foot 6 inches long, 3 foot high and 3 foot 6 inches wide, with a maximum stowage of 410 pounds. And the distance reading compass is fitted right in the pointed tail cone, with access through a door in the rear bulkhead when in flight. A forward mail compartment, 5 foot 6 inches long and 2 foot 6 inches high at its highest point, could carry up to 630 pounds and is located below the pilot's cabin floor, with access through a door on the port side of the nose. With no bomb bay fitted, the front section housed 2 fuel tanks, each of 504 gallons capacity, while the rear floor, usually found in the Lancaster, was cut back for the passenger cabin. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you found it interesting. If you like what I do on this channel, please click the like button and please subscribe, and also click the bell. Remember, it's free and you'll receive notifications when my future videos are posted. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.